Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I direct your attention to our video.
A complex world. And that demands adaptive leaders and organizations that can thrive in ambiguity and chaos. To meet this need, Force 2025 and beyond requires a new training environment that is flexible, supports repetition, reduces overhead, and available at the point of need. The answer is the Synthetic Training Environment, or STE. The STE will provide immersive and intuitive capabilities that keep pace with a changing operational environment, giving commanders the ability to overcome today's limitations and take on the challenges of tomorrow. Advancements in virtual reality, big data analysis, artificial intelligence, and terrain representation will make this possible.
With the STE, commanders will conduct tough, realistic training at home stations, the combat training centers, and at deployed locations. The STE will increase readiness through repetition of multi-echelon, multi-domain, combined arms maneuver, and mission command training. And most importantly, the STE will train soldiers for where they will fight.
The current simulations within the integrated training environment do not provide the realism, interoperability, affordability, and availability necessary to meet the breadth of training required for tomorrow's Army. The STE, however, will converge live, virtual, and constructive simulations into a single cohesive training capability. One World terrain prototypes are already pushing the boundaries of terrain representation to provide warfighters realistic training in complex environments like megacities and dense urban terrains, which are a growing operational concern. For areas with insufficient or outdated geospatial data, inexpensive terrain capture and reconstruction methods will allow individual units to rapidly collect and update terrain to support their training events as needed. In the synthetic environment itself, the STE will combine live training participants with computer-generated forces and units training remotely via collective trainers. This will allow commanders to train beyond the constrictions of local training areas. Augmented reality systems will allow soldiers to have real-time interactions with avatars representing the remote units and computer-generated forces. Though physically miles away, the remote participants will be able to fully interact with the LTA units and computer-generated forces from their simulation area. This seamless coordination between live and virtual leaders and the representation of physical elements outside the LTA enables simultaneous training in multiple domains, enhances realism, and provides the feel of a larger-scale operation. The STE will fundamentally change the way the Army delivers training capabilities by enhancing realistic training and preparing warfighters for multi-domain operations.
The STE will give us a powerful tool to fully realize objective training levels of proficiency. We'll prepare soldiers for tomorrow's missions and develop leaders to thrive in ambiguity and chaos. The STE is the Army's future.
The synthetic training environment, revolutionizing training to build readiness.
So good morning, and welcome to the Synthetic Training Environment Cross-Functional Team Warriors panel. Okay, so it's day 3, it's morning, and we started with this video, so one, so I could fire you up, and number 2, so I could kind of remind you of a couple things. I mean, first of all, this video helps us get to shared understanding and also awareness of what we're trying to achieve with the synthetic training environment. But it also allows us to understand the challenges that we're going to face as we try to deliver this. So this morning, I'm very honored that we have the opportunity to talk to you about the synthetic training environment and also to be joined by this distinguished panel to my right. And you'll get to hear from them because they offer valuable expertise in terms of what we're doing for the synthetic training environment. Now, I started with this video for a reason. And number one, it's because 2 years ago in this very forum, I stood up here and I talked to you about the synthetic training environment. I talked to you about what it was that we were trying to achieve, why we needed to achieve it, I talked about the limitations in our current integrated training environment, and I talked to you about our initial strategy that we wanted to use. And that initial strategy said I wanted to leverage the virtual and gaming industry, the $5.2 billion virtual and gaming industry that's growing every single day and has made leaps and bounds in terms of technology maturation, and I wanted to leverage your expertise to help accelerate STE, because I did not believe that it couldn't be delivered until 2030. I absolutely refused to believe that. Now, 1 year ago to this date, in this very forum, number one, the Chief of Staff of the Army said that we needed to rapidly expand our synthetic training environment. STE was designated as one of the 8 cross-functional teams, and number two, it was aligned with soldier lethality as the number 6 modernization priority. And so we had our charter from this very forum that we needed to rapidly accelerate capability into the hands of soldiers so that we could deliver STE much faster. So I'm back up here today to talk to you about STE and to talk about some of the things that we've been able to achieve since we became a cross-functional team. And we've made a lot of progress since 23 October 2018. And just to highlight a few of those, I mean, first of all, we've got approval of our Army Collective Training Environment, ICD, and we did that in record time. Now that's important because that lays the foundation elements of our the synthetic training environment. So it really laid out what we needed to do. Number two, we have increased our industry engagements, which has really led to a couple things. We've had several industry days, we've partnered with you, that led to the awarding of 7 OTAs that were focused on one world terrain and our air and ground platforms. And we did that in record time so that we could get to a user assessment in March of 2018 so we could take a look at the technology. Not only could we take a look at the technology, but we had experts, we had master gunners, we had aviators, we had technical experts, we had center of excellence, and you got instantaneous feedback on what we were seeing right there on the spot. So we're moving out quickly in that area. But in addition, in conjunction with Soldier Lethality Cross-Functional Team, we have put a focused effort to increase the lethality of our close combat soldiers and Marines. And we've done that in a couple ways. Number one is an immediate training capability, a squad advanced marksmanship trainer, to get that out in the field to our close combat soldiers so they could start training immediately, and this is delivered as a training as a service capability. Number two is that we have been working closely to develop a squad immersive virtual trainer, similar to what you have for Air Force pilots, we have for tankers, we have for our air platforms, our helicopters. We have not had a virtual trainer for our squad. And the good news is that based on what we're seeing in terms of technology, we believe that we can deliver that much quicker than our anticipated 2025 timeframe. And we can get after what the Secretary of Defense has challenged us with, and that is to provide a simulation training capability to our close combat soldiers in order to get the sets and the reps and to execute 25 bloodless battles before the first battle. So on top of that, lastly, in June, the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army codified the synthetic training environment in their vision statement, okay? So now you've seen alignment of priorities, you've seen alignment of funding, you've seen alignment of the vision. And now I'm telling you we're postured to execute quickly. So it is a great honor to be able to talk to you. We got a lot of work to do. So I'm going to briefly talk about this slide. I'm going to turn it over to the panel after that. But this really tells you about the emerging operating environment that is becoming more contested, more lethal, and more complex every single day. Multi-domain operations describes an environment where U.S. forces are contested in all domains, an environment where adversaries and competitors are challenging U.S. deterrence, and an environment that is complex, dynamic, and unforgiving. And in this emerging environment, U.S. forces and our allies will be forced to engage state and non-state actors, hybrid threats, and terrorist organizations in a myriad of different terrains, including megacities and dense littoral regions. When the Army's vision was published, it addressed this emerging environment by centering on the lethality of our exceptional soldiers and leaders. The STE is paramount to that vision. In fact, the synthetic training environment is specifically addressed as a tool that will enhance soldier and team lethality by creating tough, realistic, iterative, and dynamic training at the point of need. So simply put, STE enhances readiness by preparing the force for any fight, anywhere, and on any terrain. So looking at the hourglass on our slide, our Army prepares for this emerging operating environment by training at home station, whether that's in armories, orderly rooms, or in the field. Home station training typically culminates in a command post exercise prior to a rotation to our live combat training centers. We've represented this as an hourglass because units are constrained by time, training area availability, relevant operational environment data, and also resources required to make training iterative, realistic, and relevant. Now, this imbalance that exists between our ability to provide tough, realistic training at home station compared to what they receive at our dirt combat training centers must change. We need to be able to provide our soldiers, leaders, and units the ability to conduct hundreds of repetitions wherever they are located so they can improve muscle memory and increase proficiency, enabling our units to enter live training at a much higher level of proficiency. So through our technology areas represented by the green arrow in the center, the STE makes it possible to enhance home station training and unit performance. Most importantly, the STE is focused on establishing common standards, common data, and common terrain to maximize interoperability, ease of integration, and also cost savings. Now, before I go to our distinguished panel, the last point I want to make is that our open architecture standards ensures that the technology changes and as technology changes and matures, the STE is capable of integrating the new technology to enable the most up-to-date training that our warfighters deserve. And so that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, and I just laid out for you. But I would like for you to hear now, as we try to get to a train, rehearse, and fight capability, I would like to turn this over to General Corelli, our 32nd Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, over 40 years of service, who has actually understood and the limitations of our technology. Sir, over.
Well, thank you, Marie. I appreciate the wonderful introduction. Nothing I did as Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, except fight with the acquisition community, has anything to do with the development of STE. But I guess that was an important lesson to learn, fighting with the acquisition community in order to try to get things to soldiers when they need them. As I look at STE, I see a requirement to get something in the hands of soldiers now. This is not a tomorrow problem. This isn't a problem that we need to wait 5 years to develop requirements and another 8 to 10 years to go ahead and field something to soldiers. We need choice. We need to turn to industry. The capability is out there today to provide the kinds of things that we need in a STE-like training environment. And I believe that a training environment should have two critical aspects to it. One of it is it should be, of course, a maneuver trainer, but the other is it should be a gunnery trainer. And not a gunnery trainer that is like Miles. Miles is not a gunnery trainer. Miles provides weapons effect. No tanker ever got and spent 10 days in the box using Miles and then went up and shot as well as he could in live fire after training to Miles. I had an amazing experience as a young major. Now, I know old graybeard stories aren't normally very relevant, but we used to have a thing when people wore starched BDUs and funny ball caps called the Canadian Army Trophy. And in 1987, I was the S3 of a unit that participated in the Canadian Army Trophy. A couple of things happened at that particular competition. Number one, we were limited on the number of rounds we could fire. We had 14 months to train, and it came at the advent of two major systems that kind of changed the way we trained. The first, it was called at that time, was the COFT. It provided training fidelity and training gunners and commanders how to fight the M1 tank. The other was a thing called CCTT, or at that time, it was called SimNet. It was rushed to us in Europe because we weren't allowed to go on the range where we were going to fire the actual competition for 14 months. Now, what I learned when I went through that was the importance that a gunnery trainer needs to have the fidelity of the weapon system. If it does not, what you do is you are training negatively. One short story to explain that. One of the things that we used the COF for, given the fact that we were limited on the number of rounds we could fire, was that when we fired a particular engagement and a gunner was having a rough time with it using live rounds, we took him into the COF and trained it over and over again. We would put him back on the range, and the first few times we did it, he missed the target just about every time. We asked ourselves, what's different about the COF and shooting a live bullet? And what we realized was that the COF controls were electric controls. That if you move from an electric control to an hydraulic control and put a gunner in that seat, that did not have the fidelity of the weapon system. And he would miss until he got used to the hydraulic controls. We fixed it very, very simply. We used something called a snake board, and I just turned to General Sloan, and I said, you know what a snake board is? He said, no, I have no idea what it was. Simple piece of plywood with a line on it. You got in it, you made the gunner, go ahead, take the controls, and follow the line. And you could see where it went. Once we did that, he came out of the COF and shot the engagement every single time and got a hit. This fidelity is absolutely critical. And the only way we're going to get it, the only way we're going to keep it is if we get off of the material development idea behind STI and get on the training as a service. To me, this is like copiers. Only the United States Army would decide today that not only are we going to buy copiers, but we're going to design our own and go ahead and make them. And if we do that in this particular area, given where industry is today, I think we are basically telling our soldiers that they're going to be fighting with 5 to 10-year-old technology for the rest of their careers. I think it's time to get off that. I think it's time to get onto real training as a service. I think it's time to get off the MDD bandwagon of DOD 5000 and understand that this is a requirement we need now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Hey, so I'd like to introduce Brigadier General Mike Sloan. He's the PEO for STRI down in Orlando. He is my battle buddy as we've been working the synthetic training environment. And Mike, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Hey, sir, Vice, thank you very much. It's always great to hear your thoughts, and perfect segue, I think, to where I went ahead. Good morning to everyone that's here. So I'm the Program Executive Officer, brand new, 3 months, so I'm already an expert at simulation training instrumentation down in Orlando. Never had an assignment down in Florida before. When they said you're going to Florida, I said, thank you. So I know Fort Drum, I know the 10th Mountain Division, and I know cold weather, and I know other places as well, but when they said Orlando, wow, what a dream. And it really has turned out to be quite a dream in the challenges that it provides. And I'll share a couple things with you, though, because I think to set the stage, I want to address 4 areas this morning. So I'll start with a little bit of leadership philosophy and where the Army, especially ASALT, is going with the Army Futures Command. I think that's important to understand how the leadership philosophy is coming together on that. I'll talk a little bit about Army and ASALT working together in the acquisition reform community. I think that's important that I share that with you as well. And also industrial-based collaboration. What does that mean to you? I think that's huge. I think the Vice touched on it. Super, super important that we're collaborating with the industrial base and what technologies are out there and how we can incorporate them rapidly into what we're doing. At the end, of course, I think, ma'am, we'll have, about 10-minute question session, so I'll ask that you hold your questions to then. So under the leadership philosophy of where we're going, so it's about fostering culture change and delivering capabilities faster to the warfighters. And we understand that, right, across the entire community, whether that's from the requirements generators to the warfighters and the acquisition process that's in between there. So we have to be proactive. The CFTs have to work together with the PEOs. We're doing that. General Gervais and I are building our teams collaboratively now together, and we're working very rapidly to deliver capabilities through the synthetic training environment. We'll apply the resources that are needed, the personnel resources and the dollars that are needed into those technologies and those capabilities as we're standing up these cross-functional teams. Got Colonel Varnador, a PM here for another separate program, 06 PM CSL Select, that's now my lead for the synthetic training environment, working very closely with Mike Enlow, Chief Engineer, and the entire cross-functional team. So collectively, we're going to deliver real value to the soldiers, I think, in doing this through the cross-functional team under the leadership of the Army Futures Command. The second point that I'd like to make is under the Army Futures Command and ASALT working together, continuously collaborating as we go through this process. In the past, as the Vice noted, General Gervais briefly touched on it, it was kind of a lockstep process, a sequential process. So now we have the opportunity across the entire acquisition process, right, from requirements generation, or even before that, identifying a gap in capability, and working through this process, the entire enterprise working together, rapid prototyping and getting after capabilities, and sharing that with the acquisition community and going back to the warfighting community and going back to the requirements generators. So that process is in place, and we'll continue to deliver on that to have a better product to the soldier and get it there faster. The third point was acquisition reform. ASALT and the Army Futures Command are working closely together to expand delegating decision-making authority, so allowing ACAT-4s to be delegated down to the colonels, the PMs that are running those programs, where the PEOs, myself, I don't have to look at every single program, right? We're delegating that down to the 06 colonels, working closely with the requirements generators and the warfighters to run their programs, thereby probably getting a better solution at a much faster pace. So also reducing and streamlining the acquisition documentation. A lot of it's law, a lot of it's policy, so we're sorting our way through that. Leveraging rapid prototyping. I think a lot of you have seen that through the OTA process, right? And so we're going to continue to leverage wherever we can the OTA capability to not only rapidly prototype, but help us inform the requirements, what really should be happening, right? Get it out there in an incremental fashion so we get that capability to the warfighter as soon as possible. And we can get that snake board, right? Maybe it's a different type of snake board, but we get that feedback faster and we rapidly incorporate that into the capabilities that we deliver to the warfighter. And also then delivering the capability faster and getting it right. And so I think through the Army Futures Command and ASALT teamwork, I think we're going to be able to do that. And the number four, and I think for the industry members that are here and partners, and I've worked with a lot of you before, we've been doing a lot of this, but now working together with the warfighting community, I think we can even do better at it. And it's working with the industrial base, working with you, the industry leaders, and understanding what you're working on today, what you're working on tomorrow, helping you make informed decisions on where you want to put your investment dollars, your IRAD dollars, so you know on the back end that there's going to be a capability you can help us deliver and invest early, so you know where to spend your money. And also, I've met with a lot of members here in the last couple of days. There's also a lot of expertise in this room that understands what an acquisition strategy is, right? Because if you're going to be successful, you have to understand an acquisition strategy. And so this is complex, what General Gervais laid out. And so I've asked a lot of you that I've met with, come back to me and say, what would your acquisition strategy be? Would it be service? Would it be integrator? How would you do this, and what would the increments be? And so a lot of you have taken some notes. You're going to come back to me, and I'm going to come back to you and ask you, how would you approach this, right? I'm wide open to that. I've only had about roughly 375 programs in my last 15 years, right? So I don't have all the answers. I know a lot of ways to do things, but I'm always open, right, to see how can we do this better, because I believe that technologies and the speed of change that you can help us get there, right, is what we need to better understand. So please continue to let us know that. And I would also encourage the small companies and the large companies to work together. I think we're looking for a lot of non-traditional companies out there to come to us with technologies. And as we approach this STE effort, I see a lot of our international partners here. Secretary of Defense, line of effort number 2, talks about, right, building partnerships. And so we would like to also continue to share our ideas and our thoughts on where we're going with you, right, in large groups and small groups, however we can do that, so you can get ahead of the capability before you start investing your own dollars in something different, or we do something different and then have to try to merge them later. So I encourage the international cooperation as well. So, ma'am, that's all I have.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'd like to turn it over to our chief engineer for STE. This is Mike Inlow. Extensive background, has worked games for training, and has been with the Combined Arms Center for quite some time. So Mike, over to you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I have to say what an honor it is to sit on such a distinguished, trailblazing panel today. I got to apologize up front because I get excited when I talk about the STE, because the STE gives me, each morning I have the opportunity to present new capability ways that we can get and train our Army better and faster. And that's to have that kind of direct influence is very exciting as being part of the STE. When I talk about STE, you'll hear me talk a lot about performance, scalability, and realism. My problem is we don't have the right training capability to go through and set the exercises up. And what I mean by that is it takes more time to get the systems that are disparate to talk to each other, to get the terrains together, than it does to actually have the exercise go. So we're trying to be able to accomplish that problem and being able to give it to global terrain for an expeditionary force so the unit will always have some sort of terrain to fight on before they actually get there. From starting with the squad and where we take on the most casualties, we're taking that head on with our soldier squad virtual trainers and scaling up at the top level of global simulations for strategic exercises, expanding out to the cyber domain, the human domain, space operations, and irregular warfare, and emerging capabilities such as the Internet of Things, which is going to be able in your toaster, your telephones, which you already have in, but your lamps, your light bulbs are going to have these microprocessing units in them with real operating systems. So how do we secure against those? And then and they're also going to be able to be deliverers of broadband internet, the 5G movement. So with that, how do we leverage that kind of capability to get the training networks to our soldiers faster and secure? And we started out with one world terrain, and that's been, General Gervais will tell you about, that's been the Achilles heel for Army simulations from the start. And the Army lacks well-formed 3D terrain to enable rapid mission planning, mission rehearsal for the expeditionary force operations deployment. If we have an immediate threat come up, we lack the ability to be able to do different echelons of training to be able to respond to that threat. So with the One World Terrain, we talk about 5 steps of the process that we are supporting. It's not one format, it's not just one thing. One World Terrain is 5 things. It's collection, processing, storage, distribution, and the execution runtime of global terrain. And the most things we need right now from industry is content. And we mean a lot of 3D content and rapid ways to get them built. We go through and we're looking at, large cities, large terrains, content we have to be able to fill to be able to get the correct training piece of it. And we're moving away from the days where it would take years to get terrains done and be able, and at tremendous expense. So we're seeing great advancements in commercial industry to be able to come up with creative ways to meet those type of needs of content generation for the terrain. Our second piece I talk about is open source and the modular open system architecture, which we call MOSA. And that's when we move to open source formats and commonly used formats like FBX and OBJ, and we add appendages to them to meet our simulation needs. And being able to access REST services to be able to move the binary performance to be able to get the terrain across the pipes as fast as possible. We need the capability that we need the the process terrain to get it ready for runtime, 3D runtime engines, so we can move from one platform to another. We're never tied. The system of the STI is designated to be, while it's one system, it's composed of different modules, and those modules are replaceable and designed to be replaceable, so we can always be adaptable to the newest technologies. We want to stay away from proprietary terrain formats and government formats that we come up with that only one or two vendors make a tool for us to deal with them. We want to make sure we stay consistent with the Army, with the commercial industry, and so we're always using the stuff that we have can be easily transportable. And as we look for that, we also look to accelerate the TSS, which is the training simulation software process, to get us to multi-domain battle, moving 200 million entities around to represent the kinetics of a real live city domain. And we also talk about the world of artificial intelligence, and that's a big buzzword right now, right? And people say, well, what does that mean? And for training with artificial intelligence, we see a lot of vendors, or some extremely efficient vendors that have cloud-type processing capability. And so that's hardware. But we need the ability for the folks to be able to write the code software that we can enable those cloud-type rendering services to be able to deliver us the artificial intelligence we need to deliver those type of results. And so that's the main thing. We need the specialty code and also the capability to train our artificial intelligence algorithms to meet our training needs. And when we talk about OPT4, we need an adaptable OPT4 to go against our training scenarios as we run these repetitions. So every repetition is not the same, but it is challenging my weaknesses in my training ability. And we're also looking for AI speeding up our content development as well, being able to classify and make terrain as fast as possible. So I want to wrap up here, say how excited I am to be on this team, and thank you, General Gervais, for being such a pioneering trailblazer, so we can ensure that we maintain overmatch for the future rapidly changing times and turmoil. Thank you, and please enjoy the show.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your patience, as you heard from our distinguished panel members. So he said pioneer. I'm not sure I agree with that, but we've been asked to be disruptive, and I think the cross-functional team, STI, has been. So at this time, I'd like to open the floor up to your questions. I only ask that you leave me 2 minutes so I can sum up, the schedule. Okay, so we have somebody in the back.
You spent a lot of time talking about like the terrain and the software, but you didn't really spend any time talking about the hardware. I'm kind of curious, what are you looking at for the soldier interface? Because some of the problems I've seen over time is you get very simplistic things where the soldier's really, he's walking in place or something like that. So have you been looking at anything that's going to push the boundaries of that to make it a more realistic environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So look, our premise here is that as you took a look at our current integrated training environment, we are very hardware intensive, we are facilities based, we are contractor heavy. Okay, that is not conducive to where we want to move with STI. So as we move forward, we would like software intensive, less hardware, but with the right fidelity to execute the training, just as the former vice talked about, okay? Because what we need to do is we need to deliver this training at the point of need. So what we're trying to do right now through our actual OTAs, other transactional authorities, because we're still refining the requirement right now with the synthetic training environment, we are looking for what is that right level of fidelity, working with the experts from across the Army, the centers of excellence, the soldiers in the field, to get that defined. And that's where we want to move towards, okay? And I think that's going to be the toughest challenge. But if we have as much hardware as we have right now, and if my partner that just had to leave from soldier lethality was here, and you heard him make the comment yesterday, if it's not how we're going to train as we're going to fight, then we're going to have a whole connex full of TADS equipment that isn't being used. So it's a great question. I don't have a really great answer for you right now, but I know it's something that we are working towards defining much better, but less hardware. Mike, you want to go ahead?
So, ma'am, I can add on to that. The STI is composable to what hardware and what network capability that you have. we have different ways that we're coming up with strategies to deliver to STI to leverage what you have. So we're trying to move the concept upside down of you need this much hardware to run the software to what hardware do you have, and then I'll give you what software we can to meet the hardware that you have. And so we're looking at even down to like iPads and mobile devices for streaming service capability to get to platforms that are cheaper for your add-ons, for your VR, augmented reality glasses, just all kinds of different types of ways that we'll be able to interface with the machines. And I bring up a great point. The user interface is a thing that we really are overlooking in simulations. Our systems when we come in are not really aesthetically or intuitive pleasing to be able to enable the soldiers to go through and train that they feel intuitive from the software interface. And that's like very important because that's our interface to our customer, the soldier. So I think we really need to study and work on how we deliver that graphical user interface to our soldiers to be able to make it as pleasing as possible that they want to take the system and not feel intimidated by it, but feel like they can go on and intuitively set up their scenarios or training missions in which they could use.
Yeah. And so I think I know what you're going to say. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, there's no one in here who would climb into a helicopter with a pilot that's trained on a simulator that consists of a joystick without a cyclic collective and pedals. If you did, I don't want to be on that helicopter with you. But somehow we've got ourselves into the idea that it's not as important if you're firing a 120 millimeter round downrange. And it is as important. You know, another example would be field artillery. There's no force in the Army that trains and trains and trains exactly the way they're going to have to fire than the field artillery. They do that because bad things happen, okay, when you don't train that way. It is just amazing to me that in this day and age, we have accepted that to allow our soldiers to train on systems that don't have the fidelity of the systems that we are investing in.
Thanks, sir. I think the other thing that I would add on that question is, you know, as you take a look at training as a service could provide a lot of that hardware piece of it and keeping it up to date, whereas that wouldn't come to the Army to do. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at, because we have several examples that are already in use out in the field right now that are very beneficial in terms of training as a service and with the right fidelity. And so we're looking at all of those options right now as we're developing the STI in terms of how do we get to the right level of fidelity and the right approach to deliver the training. So, you know, we're kind of pre-MDD. We're not in the full acquisition process yet, so we're still doing all of that analysis to understand the trade space that we need right now. Question?
Yes, ma'am. Dan Whitnam, Good morning, ma'am. Dan Whitnam, I'm the Ground Combat Element Advocate at PP&O for the Marine Corps. So we have something called the Tactical Decision Kit right now, DVTE, many systems that you guys have in the Army as well. The real challenge, I think, at our level is the implementation plan, and then how, especially you're talking about close combat formations for squads, where do you physically put it? How do you maintain it? And then how do you keep it relevant other than sending a net team down there for 5 days that provides that to your sergeants, and then after 3 or 4 months you go back there, none of the stuff being utilized, it's not in the TNR manuals necessarily, and how are you holding them responsible to make sure that they have the 25 bloodless battles before they go forward and deploy or before they go to NTC, JRTC, et cetera? Thank you.
Yeah, no, and you bring up an excellent point. In fact, you guys are great, you guys are absolutely great teammates on our cross-functional team. We have actually taken your tactical decision kit and we're putting it in the hands of our soldiers so they can kind of tell us some things that, you know, either how to use it, how to improve it. You guys have done some innovative things with it, which has been great. But you're spot on with what you've seen. So as we look at this, the great thing about the cross-functional teams is that you bring every expert that you need in on the team. And, you know, everywhere from software engineers, software developers, the folks that have to, how do you refresh it, sustain it, to a life cycle approach. And so we are looking at all of that ahead of time now as we're developing the STI. You know, one of the reasons, Mike gave you his reason why he was so excited about the synthetic training environment. I mean, I will tell you why I am, and not because I'm the cross-functional team director. Okay, that is great, I love it. But what I love about the cross-functional team concept is that in addition to aligning the priorities, in addition to aligning the funding and the expertise, but this is the first time the Army has had a holistic training strategy. A holistic training strategy that we are moving towards so that we can meet the Chief's vision. You know, we've had strategies where we said, hey, this would be great, and we hooked everything together. But now we are taking an approach from the beginning. So my other cross-functional team leads, STE is already part of the future vertical lift. STE is already part of the next generation combat vehicle. And we're thinking about training and how to do this ahead of time, and we're also understanding the power, if we get this right, the power that you can train the next generation combat vehicle or the future vertical lift before you ever get in the aircraft. Okay, so I mean, all great points, because you're right, it's going to be a sustainment challenge, especially if we're pushing a lot of stuff down. So excellent point. Oh, I'm out of time? Okay, I'm out of time, so I'm sorry, but we'll be available afterwards. Just go to the next slide, and I want to sum this up. First of all, let me thank my distinguished panel. Appreciate you flying out to be here. Mike, appreciate, and both Mikes, Mike and Mike. Okay, but look, this is an aggressive schedule. First of all, the integrated visual augmentation system, the squad immersive environment, is our #1 priority. One World Terrain, our reconfigurable virtual trainers, which is our air and ground platforms, and getting the training simulation software and the management tools to do this. Now, very aggressive schedule. You see that? FY21, IOC. Now guess why it's IOC and FY21? Because you, our industry partners that we want to leverage so heavily, we have been able to do this in about a year to figure out that we can pull this timeline to the left, get this in the hands of soldiers quicker, because that's how we're going to improve lethality, and that's how we're going to improve readiness. So thank you very much for coming out. We look forward to talking with you, working with you, and also you solving the challenges that we have to solve to make this a reality. So thank you.